this video will be on a connection that I think is real between the quadrants in Ken Wilber's theory alongside development, evolution of consciousness. So how I'm going to tackle this, I'm going to first lay out some very basic notions of evolution of consciousness, and then I'll briefly outline the quadrants, and then show how I think, and I'll also mention Robert Kegan's ideas about orders of consciousness, because this plays a role in how I have come to this conclusion. And then I will show a potential integration between these two. Okay, so some essentials on evolution of consciousness, the idea being that when you're born, mind isn't fully formed. It's in a process of growth through biopsychosocial cultural experiences, so that when you interact in culture and with others and around infrastructure and so forth, your biological organism is changing, that is your physiological brain, and likewise your ability to cognize the world is also changing. And the theory goes that there are sort of rungs, or there are waves of development, and one wave transcends and includes the next in a process of growth that is patterned and somewhat predictable. Quadrants are a theory that Ken Wilber came to in '95 in his book Sex, Ecology, and Spirituality. He believes, and I think it's a very good position. I think it's very realistic that it's again that biopsychosocial cultural notion that moment to moment there are four primary perspectives in which organisms, beings, sentient beings, or even non-sentient beings take, and that is sort of interiority, broadly speaking. For humans, we have thoughts, feelings, emotions, and so forth. There's a cultural component, that is, we're in relation with others, even if there's nobody around me, as in right now, I still have a family, friends, and so forth. And objective, so analyzing behavior and science and so forth, and then interobjective, so techno-industrial complex, that sort of thing. Okay, and then now I'm going to briefly outline Robert Kegan's notions, and this is developmental psychology stuff also. He says that there are orders of consciousness. The first order is that you're self-aware, essentially, that you have impulses, that you are a sentient being. To some extent, you're kind of, you're aware, I would say. And then the next one is that you are in a culture and that you share meaning with others. A test that Piaget done to distinguish the two, he'd show a card to very young children, about 2 or 3 years of age, and the card would have red and blue, for example, on it. So you'd show the child the red side, flip it over the blue side. Then you'd ask the child, so what color am I looking at? So the child sees red, and so the child says, you see red. Obviously, you see blue, so the child cannot yet take your perspective. So it's from that first-person perspective that the child is coming. When the child enters into a social group, then the child can take the perspective of other. But it's not objectively a perspective on other, it's just the perspective of the group. We see this commonly in the major religious traditions of the world. I'll leave it at that. There's more complexity to it, but I'll leave it at that. And then the third-person perspective is the ability to be objective about things, to analyze them, and so forth, and that comes next. So the distinguishing mark here that Piaget might do with children you have a beaker that's thin and tall, and then a beaker that's fat and low sitting. And if you pour the fat beaker into the thin one, and then you ask the child, maybe 8-year-old, is there any difference between the water in the thin beaker than the one that was fat? And the child will say, yes, that there's more water now in this tall beaker, which from a rational perspective seems absurd, but that's the way a conventional mind sees reality. And so if you show the child maybe grows up to be 13 or 14 years old, if you show the child at 14 years old the video of them at 8 saying this, they'll say, oh, maybe that wasn't even me. I didn't say that. That's crazy. I would never say that. They just can't believe that they would think the way that they thought. And then the next one is a fourth person perspective. It involves sort of relativism, pluralism, multiculturalism, and I would argue really sparked the sort of Marxian revolution of the true understanding of the techno-economic base. Okay, so the Keegan model has these orders of consciousness, and the quadrant model has these 4 quadrants. I'm positing here that indeed there's a correlation between orders of consciousness and the quadrants. Now, as Ken Wilber points out, all 4 quadrants arise moment to moment. We always are experiencing first, second, third, fourth person perspectives. It's just the degree to which we are aware of them and from which perspective we are coming. And so I'm postulating here that as we develop, our perspective shifts between these perspectives, these 4 quadrants. And in doing so, it's a primary lens through which one is looking at that developmental stage. So at the ages of maybe 2, you're primarily taking the upper left perspective, the upper left quadrant, which is thoughts, feelings, emotions, impulses. You're coming from a first-person thinking mode, and this is in the thinking mind. So this pattern might repeat itself sort of like a fractal down into animals, insects, and so forth. That's purely speculative at this point, but I'm going on this theoretical move right now. So from the first order of consciousness to the second order of consciousness parallels second person perspective taking. So you're primarily coming from the lower left quadrant, where culture and interpretation matters. That's the primary lens through which they're looking in the mind's eye. The next one is objective. So you're shifting to third person perspective. You're in the third order of consciousness. Now this is the upper right quadrant in Ken Wilber's model. And this is the rise historically of industrial Enlightenment paradigm. And then you shift down to the lower right quadrant, in which there's the techno-industrial base, where you start to understand the nature of that and how infrastructure actually augments our reality in lots of ways. More objectively looking at language games, for example, in the Wittgensteinian sort of way. And then finally, the next move is to objectify the whole 4-quadrant system into an integrative map. And so that's the next move, where those 4 quadrants co-arise, and you can sort of start to see that co-arising in yourself. And so this is the notion that you move upper left, upper right, lower right, objectify. Peace.